Who are the strangers that walk in upon us and upset our lives? From whence comes the person who marches to a different drummer, to whom the cherished wisdom of the ages is but chaff upon the mind? Why are they so different? Or are they really so different after all? Are they not perhaps only like ourselves, except that they have kept something we have lost along the way? Who and what is the creative person? All of life is a creative process. The world is constantly new. The efforts of human beings to respond to it endlessly creates new patterns that shape the environment as it is experienced. Thus, the important question is not, why do some people appear to be creative, but rather, why is it that some people do not appear to use the creative ability with which they are endowed? Do you use your creativity to deal with crises in your life? Or is crisis a time of despair and defeat for you? The Chinese word for crisis is a two-part character, which means both danger and opportunity, two opposite aspects of life which they see as being part of a whole. In this series of programs, we will look at how various persons have made the times of crisis in their lives into opportunities through their creativities. We will focus particularly on persons in their mid-years, but our participants will span the years from childhood to the golden years. KXTV presents Creativity or Crisis with your host, John Hester.
Too often we tend to define creativity in its most narrow terms, but for us it has to do with how we engage life at all levels, effectively. Our guest this morning has given us a much broader definition of creativity, and Jenny will introduce our guest and tell you what we're going to do this morning.
Okay. A few months ago, the name Mark Dubois became a national headliner. He tried to chain himself to the river, Stanislaus River, in the hopes of stopping the Army Corps of Engineers from flooding the river and destroying the life in the canyon. He belongs to a group called Friends of the River, and a little later on in the program we'll tell you how you can get involved with that group. But right now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mark Dubois. He is a personal friend of mine. We've known each other over 7 years, and his visit with us reminds me of the good times when we used to go on the river and take the children from St. Patrick's home down the Stanislaus. Does that bring back memories, Mark?
Oh, it does, it does. This was, my life doesn't get on the river very often anymore. Those are nice memories to think back of sharing it with all those kids. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
But coming from a city environment, how did you become interested in nature?
Well, I think I spent a lot of time when I was young. My family went car camping every weekend, or at least once a month, and so got a little bit in contact with it that way, and eventually started spending time up on the South Fork of the Trinity River and learned a lot about rivers up there. And then eventually I started to get to know the Stanislaus River Canyon and started cave exploring up in the Stanislaus, about 15 years ago. And eventually found out that, that river down below, they even raft it. And so eventually started rafting it and found out how exciting rafting was. And then I'd always been interested in anthropology, and so all of a sudden I found out there were all these ruins throughout this whole canyon. So I had fun exploring all the ruins of this canyon every weekend, finding some more old mining relics or some Indian relics. And as I got to know those, eventually I was getting to know all the plants in the canyon. And it was fun to watch them through their seasons and get to see their cycles, and eventually realized that the Indians used nearly all the plants in that canyon. And anyway, the more time I spent there, the more exciting it was, and it was great.
Now, you've traveled all around the world, haven't you? I know that you've been one of the first to be on some rivers in other parts of the world. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, I'm not sure I was quite the first, but there was a river down in, there's a couple rivers in Guatemala that I've run. Mm-hmm. And one is a really huge river like the Grand Canyon. It's a big jungle river and has some Maya ruins along the way, and that was exciting. And then a couple years ago, a friend and I went down and explored the tributary to that dropped out of the mountains, and the river was the most dense jungle I've ever seen, and some amazing little waterfalls that we had to portage around, and the few natives we saw that actually ran away from us when we said "Buenos dias," which most people speak Spanish, but they were totally out of contact with civilization. And so it was disappointing not to be able to speak to them, but it was more disappointing they ran away from us.
Well, you're 6'8". They're probably
scared
of this monster.
I was in this dinky boat out in the middle of this river, but they were not used to seeing anybody at all, especially going by in a boat. They didn't know what rubber was. So it was kind of fun.
Do you recall anything else unusual from your trips?
Oh, it was funny doing that trip, because for the last few years of my life, I haven't been traveling. I've been more in cities and learning about phones and learning about water politics and those things, and it was amazing to go traveling again and get flooded with all these. I spent a good portion of my time doing traveling and learning about Central America and anthropology and archaeology, and so it was traveling. It was just exciting to get flooded with all of those things that I had once spent a lot of my time doing, and it kind of tantalized me and wanted me to do more of it. But I find that right now what I'm doing feels like is most important to me, and I will have to wait till someday when I can get back to that other kind of exploring, because right now I've been doing a different kind. So.
Of course, when you go back to Guatemala, it won't be with the neck brace that you had the time that you broke your neck.
Yeah, well,
Mark has
Tell us
really
about
good
that.
stories about that.
Well, I ended up one night, we had an incredible nice sauna, like the old Indians used to do, and I dove in the water, but I forgot they turned the river off at nighttime, and so I landed in about a foot of water. And for a 6'8" body, it doesn't do good for the neck. So, but fortunately, my body recovered fast and made me appreciate things that good old modern technology has, and go, oh, okay, well. And so learned a lot from it, and tried not to be too cautious. I still want to keep jumping off. It took me a year or two before I was able to jump off cliffs again, but eventually I've gotten into it again. So.
You talked to, when we were talking before the show about reading water. What's involved in that?
Well, the more time you spend with the river, when you first go to a river, there's an incredible power and a surge that goes on, and it feels totally random, and as though there's no pattern to it. But the more time you spend with that power and that randomness, the more you see that it has its own pattern. And learning to read the water that's one of the excitement about sharing a whitewater river, and that you get a chance to get a feel for that water, and eventually you learn that there's an amazing pattern to it, and it's exciting. It's not one of the things that initially your mind mentally translate, well, that's caused by an eddy, when you eventually realize the rapid and the water is tied into the same thing in the rocks. But eventually it becomes innate, and the exciting thing about rivers, the more you do it, is it becomes a dance. And for me, playing on the river was one of the first times I learned to dance. I've played basketball a little bit here in Sacramento, but I always tripped a lot more than I played. And I always closed my hands after the ball hit my chest, so I was never really good at that. But the river was a place where I actually learned how to dance for the first time in my life, and it was an exciting feeling, sharing the excitement of that river and sharing it with other folks, and watching how the magic of that river just totally changed people's lives. Again, eventually sharing it with kids, and just watching how a lot of those urban kids had never been outside before, and sharing a little bit of the outdoors and the magic of the wilderness, and teaching them that they could do far more than they were ever taught they could. In cities they're taught, you can't do too much, you've got to stay here and don't do too much, and you don't really have any talents. Well, all of a sudden they were swimming rapids and finding out they could do that, and they were walking off cliffs as we taught them how to rappel, and they were going into caves that they'd never been in, and they were learning that all these plants were edible, and they weren't foreign things, and they learned that snakes ran away from you rather than biting you all the time, and they learned that nighttime was a scary time, but it didn't have to be scary, that it was just because it was a foreign environment. So it was neat sharing those things and learning from them and sharing those kind of things.
A lot of times we forget what it's like just to wake up and see the stars, or just to be outside and do something totally different. We normally don't sleep outside. Right. And when we took those children, they were kind of petrified at first, right. And yet after a while they blended in. They just became one with that type of nature, and that's what maybe all of us should get back to.
That's what I saw. The river was an amazing opportunity to get. It was a place for me to get back in touch. I realized I'd been raised in a city all my life. I was raised here in Sacramento, and I really love Sacramento. I think it's one of the finest cities I've ever visited and been in and lived in. And yet at the same time, I also realized that I really got out of touch with our Earth and how our Earth lives. We're used to living in totally manipulated environments, and that's great because it gives us all our civilization. But what I found for me is that the highest times of my life were living in a pair of cutoffs and a pair of tennis shoes and a little tin cup. And eventually I realized I didn't need the cup or the shoes, and realized that I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. And realized that, gee, maybe sometimes we don't need more things in life. Maybe we need to get back in touch with some of those basics that are around all of us and share with each other. It was really exciting watching the glow of those kids as we shared the magic of the outdoors and also shared time together. The kids that were often called, quote, delinquent. But I found out, no, on a river there's no such thing as a delinquent. A delinquent only means that there's nobody that cares about them. When they break a window, there's no parent that's going to say, hey, I'll take care of you. But out on a river, it turns out there's nothing to break because you can hurt the plants and trees, but no one puts you in jail, but most of the time you don't have to do those things because there's so many things to occupy your creativity that you're always exploring. There's always something new to see and to touch, and it's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like being on the river really has a sense of value itself. And I remember you talked about the difference between recreation and recreation. And could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, Friends of the River has been focusing on the Battle of the Stanislaus. And I've heard the argument, well, it's only for a few, elitist few, and it's only recreation for those people that want to play. And again, that word recreation does come from recreation. And again, I've just watched people's spirits be totally transformed by sharing that river experience. And 2 days is a brief time, but at the end of that trip, I've watched people all of a sudden go, wait a second, what's my life all about? What have I been doing? I keep going 8 to 5 every single day, and yet I'm not smiling. And all of a sudden I've been smiling, and I've let go of all these things that I've been storing up. Anyway, I've had friends that have been on longer trips, like on the Grand Canyon, and they've talked to their passengers. Their passengers sent letters saying, well, we got back home and we sold half the goods in our house because we realized we didn't need them anymore. We realized that we don't need all those things to make us happy. And then 6 months later, well, we decided we didn't get rid of enough, we're getting rid of more of it. And other people who actually went back home and actually sold their house and decided that maybe living was being more involved with life and finding a whole new way of selling things and actually traveling and working part-time and making a living and then traveling part-time and exploring the world. And it was exciting watching that world, that the river had just transformed their lives because it got them in touch with a reality that they had totally gotten out of touch with, that I think is inside of us, but we sometimes lose perspective on. So it has been exciting to watch people get recreated. And I realize that's what recreation's all about. We all live in the humdrum of urban cities where we're always out of touch. And it's nice to get our recreation is not just mere pleasure because we're going to play because it's fun to play, but because we need to play, because that balances our psyche some. And that's what living's all about, is being balanced. And anyway.
How did you go from a personal consciousness of the river to developing more of an environmental consciousness?
Well, that kind of evolution is hard to retrace. But I watched when I was sharing the river with kids for several years. I was taking all these varieties of youth groups down. It was really exciting doing that. And part of the justification I had for playing is all I was doing. I was laughing and playing all the time, and it felt exciting. They brought up the food and usually gave us enough money for gas, and it was great. So I didn't have any. We were camped out all the time, so I didn't have anything to complain about. But part of my self-justification for having so much fun was that, well, gee, we're going to teach these kids environmental education so that when they go back to a city, they will change their lifestyles some, so that we don't waste, because most of them don't realize that their faucet is connected to this river, and that when they leave that faucet on and they waste all that water when it runs down the gutter, that it comes from someplace, that they're taking it away from someplace else. And often, so we waste things not because we want to, but because we just aren't sensitive. So we hope to help teach those kids that maybe we can all change our lifestyles and not leave all these electric lights on and things like that. But the more I was there, the more I realized that, well, yes, that feels really good, but it turns out there won't be anything left by the time those kids grow up. If we don't start saving a little bit of what we have now, there won't be anything left, because we were mostly sharing things on the Stanislaus. Turns out it was one of the only rivers in California that we could find that had everything all combined. One of the only wilderness areas that was so accessible to urban folks, the only canyon with limestone caves in it, one of the only ones in the middle of the gold rush country that if you go on the South Fork of the American, it's beautiful, but you're trespassing, so you can't go and explore the ruins. And so it was exciting to do it on this river, but I realized, well, we're going so fast at paving over our world, not because of need, but only because of wanting to continue waste, that we can't afford. I found myself gravitating back in the city and getting involved in all the battles for the Stanislaus, because I realized that a lot of decisions get made in a vacuum. We live in these big buildings in Sacramento here, and we plan the future of the rest of the world, but we don't go out and see what's out there. And we also don't take responsibility for the long term. We kind of have a short-range sight. Well, let's build more, but we don't take responsibility for that long term. How much are we consuming, and what do we need to have? And so, again, found myself more and more involved with the Stanislaus, which, as I learned about the Stanislaus battle, I learned that, again, I got involved because I cared about the life of this one canyon. But the more I got involved with it, I realized that, again, this place was being destroyed not because of need, but only because of old momentum. It was a great idea 20 and 40 years ago when it was authorized. And now we know it's not a good idea, but we can't change our momentum. And so the more I realized that was going on in a lot of places. So Friends of the River started working on a lot of different watershed issues. We started working on creeks that get channelized, again, because it looked like a good idea 20 years ago, and it's not anymore. But that and forest practices that are devastating our forest, and we're not going to have much logging in California at the rate we're going because we aren't practicing a sustained yield. So we worked on those things, but we've focused especially on dam fights because we looked around and we saw that there's over 1,300 dams stifling the flows of California rivers. And I say stifling, well, there's a balance, right? We've gotten very, very rich because we've controlled all those rivers. But most rivers are like like the Stanislaus. That was the 14th dam. New Maloney's Dam is the 14th dam on that river, and you hit the law of diminishing returns. So this big, huge dam just didn't return that much to our society.
Now, you brought a film with you today.
Oh, right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that as we see the film, and you can describe
Sure.
the dam and the whole process that
Sure,
you've
that-
been going through.
That shows it was, a lot of it was taken this spring, so it shows some of the, in fact, this is Parrott's Ferry Bridge. And here's some of the people enjoying some of the whitewater of the rafting going down. They're all in a paddle boat. This is a fellow who's often a Grand Canyon River guide and has actually put together a photo show that's now in San Diego and was in the governor's office for 6 months and went back to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. And he's tried to capture the magic of rivers and share them with other people and make people realize the value of these. Because often we destroy these places not because we just don't know what's there. In the back you can see the sheer limestone cliffs of the Stanislaus, which are the only limestone canyons of any note on the whole west coast. This is the new Highway 49 bridge, and in the back you can see the reservoir is now flooded. There's New Maloney's Dam, and again water started backing up this spring behind that reservoir, and here's in the springtime with water coming out the pin stalks at the bottom. Here's all the trees that have been flooded this last spring. The water rose about 100 feet. Here's the old Maloney's Dam, built in 1928 and now flooded over by 100 feet of water. That's the old Highway 49 bridge, and you can see the last vehicle going across it as well as a raft going across it. And again, that's now far underwater. Again, some of the trees underwater, and a lot of critters got flooded. Everybody doesn't quite understand what happens when a canyon floods, but a lot of critters drowned. Here's some swallows that were building their nests on the old bridge. Well, a week later, all those swallow nests and all their eggs that they had laid were all flooded out, and it was really sad watching. Here's some ancient Indian petroglyphs. The Indians thousands of years ago came by and did some writing on the walls which nobody quite understands yet, and people were studying and trying to figure out what these all mean. And you can see here that they're just going underwater. I was in fact camped right across the way from there when I was in the canyon. This is one of the most picturesque little valleys I had ever seen. It's an old house site and town site that a family had come in during the gold rush days. And as you explored this place, you could just see all the human creativity that went into making this place. And it was all torn down. That's again the new Highway 49 bridge beyond it there, where that's the old house site, and it's all gone now, and it's all underwater. This was at the old town site of Maloney's, which happened to be where they found the biggest piece of gold in the world ever found, was found there, about 3 feet long. And this is a picture of me in the middle of the canyon, unfortunately. I hadn't planned on doing any media when I was in the canyon, but well, I'll talk about it later. This is a thing called Row for the River. Just a couple months ago, people in Golden Gate Park came out and rolled for the river. And they got, I think several hundred letters were written, but they wanted to make people more and more aware of it. And so they had a big gathering in Golden Gate Park. The canyon again gets, here you see some disabled folks, and some of the disabled folks are realizing this is one of their only chances to get into the wilderness, and they've been getting more and more involved in saying, hey, we've got to save this place because we don't have places that we can go to, and this gives us an equal opportunity, and there's no other place like this anywhere nearby for us to have a chance to go out to the wilderness and see what it's like. and there's the river rolling along. Again, it's been fun to watch people's creativity come out of this. This is one of the last shots, and it shows the bridge, and you can see a sign there saying, "No flooding above Parrott's Ferry." About 500 people came out a week or two after I got out of the canyon for a rally that had been planned, and said, "Wait a second, we can't afford to destroy what's left of the Stanislaus Canyon." It was exciting seeing how many people care and how many people have been using their creativity to figure out, how do you work with the system? How do you make the system, which got committed to a decision many years ago, wake up to the fact that, wait a second, we don't have to complete our mistake. We all know it was a mistake many years ago, but now do we have to go ahead and follow through on our mistake, or can we have the maturity and the courage and the wisdom to admit, wait, we made a mistake, and sure, we spent millions of dollars, but this dam doesn't produce that much. And besides that, we take away from too many future generations, and we don't have that right to do that. So,
what actually inspired you to change yourself?
Well, I guess it came from, several years before, I had sat in the middle of one of the little side creeks in the Stanislaus Canyon, and I just felt all the life of that canyon. And I realized that we were getting ready to destroy all this life, and for one, we had no right to do that. But even further, we were going to destroy it not because we needed it, but because we were stuck by old momentum, because we didn't want to consume wisely what we have. And so I felt like if I didn't make a personal statement, I would be as guilty as the Corps of Engineers. And so I realized I was going to have to do something, and several times I thought I'd make a statement similar to what I did, but each time we tried to go through the system. But each time I was amazed at the Corps of Engineers' ability to pay attention to construction schedules, but totally neglect all the other laws they were supposed to uphold, and watch all the other agencies that are supposed to help mandate those laws and enforce them, and the Corps always was able to overcome them because of their construction schedule, had much more precedent. And so what happened this spring was the Corps nearly, less than a month before I was ready to go in the canyon, suddenly announced, we're going to have to go up another 20 or 30 feet, which means flooding another mile or 2 or 3 of canyon. And I was amazed because they had several laws that said that they weren't supposed to do that. But they were sounding like they were going to, our construction schedules say we might have to do that. And I couldn't believe it. And so before I went in, all the state and federal people whose laws they'd been violating had written the Corps saying, wait a second, you guys shouldn't be doing this. But there was still no confirmation that they would be sensitive to those laws. And so I realized that I had to make a personal statement. And again, I guess I felt enough connected with all the life in that canyon that I felt like, look, there's 9 million years of evolution going on in that canyon. And I'm only here for a few years. All that life's been evolving and changing. And beyond that, what right do we have to take it away when again, it's not because of need, it's only because we want to continue wasting. Because we've been taught to consume, and we'll consume anything put in front of us, and sure, we can fill up that dam and we could use it all, but we don't need it. And I'd already watched the lower 5 miles of canyon be flooded. The reservoir had been rising all spring long, and it had flooded all that life you saw in the film earlier. And as it flooded all that life, it was really sad to me, and much more than that. It felt like part of me had been lost with it. And so I realized that, I've compromised more of this river than I have a right to give away. It doesn't belong to me, and yet I compromised and I said half the canyon can be flooded, but I can no longer personally compromise. And that I have to make a statement, and if I have to join the rest of my friends in that lower canyon, all the critters and the trees, so be it. And but at the same time, I know it doesn't have to happen, and I also know the Corps shouldn't be violating these laws. How can they get away with that? And so.
But what your gesture really showed was that one person does make a difference, because you have no idea the impact that symbol had on a lot of people. It changed their whole ideas about what's been going on.
Well, it's hard for me to know where that went to, but one of the things I have realized that had my statement been done in a vacuum, had I just gone up there with no past history, nothing would have happened. But I realized that part of the reason my one statement was able to have an impact was because of how many other people have been involved in this. 500,000 people ended up signing petitions to get this qualified. 30,000 people collected those signatures back in '74. And just thousands of people have spent time doing whatever they could. They were all busy people with their own lives, but they spent part of their time trying to say, wait a second, we can't make this mistake. And I realized had all those people not done their little piece, then my action would have been nothing. It would have been a straw in the wind. But I've been excited in the past few years as I've been involved in watching our process that it does work. And what's excited me is seeing how much 1 or 2 or 3 people can make a major difference if they get involved in our process. And with our the squeaky wheel does get the grease in our system. And we've often been taught that, well, I'm only a number and and my vote doesn't count. But I've seen that that's not true at all, that each one of us can have a major impact if we choose to focus. And the dilemma is often figuring out where we want to focus, because there's a multitude of things we all care about. But I find myself now, on any issue I care about, I at least write a postcard right then before I forget, because I learned that if I procrastinate tomorrow, I forgot about it, so now I don't do it anymore. But so now so I at least write a postcard. But I've learned that by focusing on one issue, we can have a major impact on that, whatever it chooses to be. Could you quickly
tell us something about Friends of the River? We're almost out of time now.
Sure, okay. Again, Friends of the River has been working on a lot of different river issues. We're now refocusing on the Stanislaus, and we're hoping to use it as a symbol to our whole nation that we can no longer afford to waste our resources, that we can't afford to do that anymore. And so we're hoping that people can get in touch with us and find a way for them to get plugged into helping make sure we save the life of the Stanislaus Canyon, but also the life of all of our other rivers, and also help make a statement to the fact that, look, we've got a few precious resources left, and we've filled up the West is now occupied. There's no more where that came from. And we have to start learning to live with our land rather than against it. And there's a lot of ways that people can get involved, and so...
Can they call you and get on a mailing list, or how can they...
Yeah, hopefully they can call, and there's the number on the screen, in fact, 451-9955. And that's here in Sacramento. We're also in the phone book if anybody wants to get in touch. And by calling and writing, we can for sure put people on a mailing list. We can also, for anybody who has a little more time than... I mean, if you want to write a letter once a month, you can get on the mailing list, and that'll be a way to do it. But if you want to get involved a little further, we can let you know how to get involved in the Stanislaus or other watersheds that you're interested in. Some people have a creek or a river they love, and there's often now people starting to work on those issues. And we can let you get connected with the other people that are working on all the different river issues. One close by is the South Fork of the American, which right now El Dorado Irrigation District plans a bunch of dams on. The Tuolumne, the city of San Francisco, is planning a bunch of dams, and yet it's being studied for federal wild and scenic river system. There's a whole lot.
I want to thank you for joining us.
Sure.
And we really appreciate the way you describe creativity in a different way, and also the fact that you've kind of shown us that one person really can make a difference. And I trust that the viewers have, got the sense of that too. And we'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll return in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Creativity or Crisis was a public affairs presentation of KXTV Channel 10.